And don't let me down. Right, policy for the appointment and remuneration of directors to council organisations. Mr. Thompson, thank you for all your hard work on this.
That's fine, it's a pleasure.
Would you like?
I have been honoured, nay moved, to have been part of this project and to have brought this policy to you today.
Thank you. Would you like to just take us through some of the main amendments from the paper that we saw last week but deferred till this week?
Yes. Well, we clarified the legal liability around members who weren't being paid. There's no difference there. You're still subject to the same rights and obligations as a director of a company. We have modified the wording in paragraphs 510 and 511 just to clarify that the CCOs and CCTOs that there are no council directors on doesn't include CCHL. We clarified that. Paragraphs 910, 911 and 912, they've been amended, and that arose out of a discussion. I think the point was raised by Jamie, that rather than tie the election of elected members to council organisations or council-controlled organisations or CCTOs, that instead we've got to recognise the element of public service referred to. The council has resolved that a person appointed to the governing body of an external organisation in his or her capacity as an elected member or employee will not receive the remuneration otherwise payable, which I think was generally agreed was a better way to put it. 6.2 of the policy, you may recall that I had recommended we set up a small panel to deal with the appointments of elected members to council organisations. It has been suggested that the members of the panel be the mayor and the deputy mayor, rather than what I had in there initially. There's also been some discussion around the recipients, the first recipients of the proposal that elected members do not receive the remuneration they might otherwise be entitled to, and the recommendation is that half of the fees from CCHL plus the fees from Christchurch, New Zealand, I think it is, will go to the innovation and
Christchurch NZ. Thank
Christchurch you. NZ. Sorry, I knew I'd get them around the wrong way.
I'm just getting everyone used to the expression.
Yeah. Okay. I'll better read my notes then, make sure I get it right. I don't want to be in the same position again. Resolves that the organisations... Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't got the latest one. Oh,
sorry?
Yes. No, sorry, that's not right.
That's not right?
Didn't we... Let me go back to my original... Yes, what I've got is what we should have is the Innovation and Sustainability Fund to receive half the remuneration payable to council directors appointed to the board of Christchurch City Holdings Limited, and all of the remuneration paid to councillor directors appointed to the board of Christchurch NZ, and the Mayor's Welfare Fund to receive half the remuneration paid to councillor directors of CCHL, and all of the remuneration payable to the director appointed to Transwaste. That was, so that we need to change that. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how that happened. Joe, do you want me to bring this over to you? It's bound to have been my fault.
Right. Well, I'm happy to move this and seconded by Andrew. So are there any questions, David, Aaron and Phil?
Given that we're all deemed by IRD to be self-employed, what advice have we sought from IRD as to shifting from a position where directors' fees are taxed, in my mind correctly so, to a position where directors' fees still earned by councillor directors are directed by council resolution to be donated untaxed to council charities, and CCOs, CCTOs are simply required to comply with the resolution?
That's quite a detailed question, David. It would have been nice maybe if we'd had that discussed at the earlier sessions we had. Carol, are you better able to answer that? It's a tax issue.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
You know, the part of the question is about instead of councillor fees being paid to councillors who are self-employed and for which tax would therefore be paid, that these are donations made in lieu of fees. So directors foregoing fees and donations paid, obviously without tax being paid into the, well, one's a trust and one's into the council organisation for distribution from those as an alternative to paying fees which tax would be paid for. So does that raise any issues with the Inland Revenue Department? Because part of what started all of this being challenging from the start was that question, because there wasn't an easy way for councillors to work out what the tax implications were and then pay. And in fact this mechanism was designed in order to remove the problem, so no fees are paid to council directors, councillor directors. They are paid, there is a donation made in lieu of fees to a named source. So, but is that okay with Inland Revenue is the question?
I believe so, because you're not actually receiving the income, so therefore you've got no tax obligation.
So we're still technically earning the income?
No?
In the last 4 years, I've now donated $150,000 to various things via the director's fees. The accountant's advice is that because I haven't received the income, there is no tax liability for that.
And that was the advice I received from my accountant too.
Well, I suppose I'm a little disappointed that we've had no real advice of that position conveyed in a proper manner to elected members. The next question I really want to ask is probably a little convoluted as well. I'm aware of the chairman of at least a couple of our CCOs and CTOs being absolutely aghast about the resolution imposed upon their board. Whilst they're obliged to comply, what discussions have been held with the relevant board chairs regarding the implications of the directive, and how does that directive comply with boards' constitutions, i.e. will a board need to amend its constitution to legally comply with the directive? Should the letter of expectation for each board be revised to make provision for the resolution? And what are the taxation issues that face each board as a consequence of this proposal?
I can answer the tax one. So each board or each organisation will be able to receive tax deductions for the donations.
Only for Mayor's Welfare Fund, not for the...
Yeah, sorry, not for the trust fund.
Yeah.
Pretty hairy. Okay, leave it at that.
Okay. All right. So, sorry, were there other questions? Aaron and then Phil.
So I've got a interesting one, Ian. It's around number 4 that's up there. If we are making a decision today, and I'm assuming we are making a decision, which means that all members come in with a clear and open mind around making their decision, not predetermined, how can any member that's sitting on a board or appointed to a board make a decision when it potentially has a financial implication to that member?
I have considered that.
So my question is, are we on safe ground doing that? That's not challengeable
yes,
in any way.
this is a policy that you're adopting. So the Officer of the Auditor General draws a distinction between decisions of this nature and decisions that may be specific to a matter being dealt with by one of the CCOs or an organisation that you might be part of. So I don't think there's an issue with you considering and making the decision today.
Not for me, because I'm not appointed, so I'm on safe ground.
No, the council as a whole.
Right, okay, so that's my question. Then my other one is a follow-on on the taxation one, and that would be around if a councillor is making a donation, let's just pick a number of $10,000 a year to one of these organisations, can they not claim the tax on that? Can it not be set up differently that they would then get it back as a donation? Because if, like Councillor Barker said, if she's paying 20 or 30 a year, there's a substantial claim back potential.
No, there isn't.
No, but that's my point. If it's channelled differently and you did receive it and pay tax on it, you would then...
Because the claims against the tax.
Okay, so there's no benefit to do it that way?
No.
Okay.
Phil?
Ian, these may be in place, but I just want to make... I'm supportive of these proposals, and I'm just referring to 911. And what I want to make sure is, have we got, or can we develop some processes so that, in fact, there's no perception whatsoever that when it comes to making a decision about, for example, an application to one of the funds, that there's any perceived bias even on the part of councillors. So my question really is, do we have, or should we not have, if we don't, should we not have some very clear processes around that part of it?
We can develop those processes.
They could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Thanks, Ian.
All right. No. All right. So, is there any discussion about the resolution? Yeah, but debating. David, Dion, Phil, Jamie.
Well, this subject's been one of significant interest to myself, obviously the current councillors, and importantly also the future councillors. I had an appreciation when I was elected that I was applying for a position where, should I have the required skill set, I may have the opportunity to apply for a position on a board with commensurate remuneration. It's now ended up akin to getting a job, then the job spec changes and you're told, sorry, you can't now earn what was outlined in the job spec when you applied for it. I've sort of had a discussion before about IRD determination. I believe under the IRD determination I am a self-employed contractor. If I was an employee of council, I would expect to reimburse my director's fees to my employer. However, I am self-employed, so should not need to do so. This directive, in my opinion, is an intrusion into the role of a self-employed person. Just talking a little bit about boardroom dynamics. Councillor appointed directors will sit alongside independent directors who are paid. All share the same liability for their decision making, both legally and financially, and are subject to the same risk and exposure to actions that can be pursued should they make ill-founded decisions. In some cases, councillors sit on a board with members of other territorial authorities who are paid for their services. it's an extreme anomaly to pay some and not others, which may in the long run create a situation where experienced directors, both independent and councillor, will not make themselves available to a board where there is this inconsistency, not to mention the taxation irregularities each board will inherit. I actually consider this to be a rather Orwellian attitude. The resolution has synergies with Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but eventually some animals become more equal than others. It's been asserted that some of us attend many meetings unpaid. I'm certainly out several nights a week and have numerous weekend engagements, all unpaid and most without the risk and liability that exists in a directorship. The ability of a councillor who has relevant boardroom experience to sit on a council board and be remunerated, in my mind, is no different to an MP with experience being asked to be a cabinet minister with commensurate remuneration. It was disturbing in the last term when the favoured charity of one councillor was in strife and suddenly the rules changed and donations to a charity of choice was allowed. Personally, I believe a director should be paid for their time and expertise, recognising the principles, integrity, legal responsibilities of the role and the qualifications and experience they've gained over a long period. However, I'm reasonably pragmatic enough to appreciate that I'm expressing a minority viewpoint. I'm unlikely to win the day, however, I feel compelled to express my views. There is a slightly more palatable solution that could be pursued should the desire to donate directors' fees be pursued. I would actually urge that consideration be given to 1, the council director fees be paid to the councillor director, being paid for the board service he or she contributes. That those fees earned are then subsequently taxed at source. That the residual fees are donated. That a list of appropriate donation recipients be established, and that directors can choose where their fees are to be donated. Such a move, I believe, would sit more comfortably with the administration of our CTOs and our CCOs. To coin an often used phrase, I think this is a revolting proposition. I will not support the resolution and urge others not to support it, and to allow time to work a reasoned solution that sits more comfortably with our CCOs and CTOs and with those who sit on our various boards both now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Dion, Phil, Jamie, Sarah, Glenn.
There were some good points actually there, Dave. I appreciate that thought, and I hadn't actually heard of that option before, which is actually quite handy. But anyway, so I will not be supporting number 7, purely because, and I've tried to get this conversation had a couple of times, but people have just been too busy and never got it there. But anyway, I signalled it the other day that I wouldn't support that. The reason is that I want to choose where I would be putting directors' fees that I'm not on any directorships at the moment, but that I potentially could be paying into the future. I'm a very strong advocate of that, purely because recently when my father passed in the mental health ward, it was a shock that how little money they had to be able to deal with the needs that he would have needed to survive. And so I would actually prefer to give my money to the Mental Health Foundation for that very reason. So I mean, I won't support number 7, and if you want to break it up, then I'd support the first 6, because in principle I do support giving directors' fees in our role to a charity of choice, but that's where I sit with it.
Phil, Jamie, Sarah, Glenn.
Look, I strongly support the recommendations actually. My view is that as elected members to council, that clearly, as is in the report too, that component of, and a very important component of public service. And I think that an example of that is that the councillors around this table who have knowledge and skills more in the social and supporting our community's area, that in fact those skills are just as important and equally important as, for example, councillors where there are financial skills which are acknowledged and also necessary. We need to have an egalitarian council where there is some equity around the table, and having fees paid into these funds, I think, helps achieve that, rather than some councillors say meriting more than others. So, you know, we have a slogan here at council: one council working together with integrity and passion, and I think we all stand for that, and I'd urge councillors to support these recommendations.
Jamie, Sarah, Glenn.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to vote against this. And if the decision's made to reject this and indeed remunerate directors, any money reimbursed to me for the work that I've done in these council directorship roles, I will donate in their entirety to charity. And I want to stress that so that my argument can be taken truly as objective, and understand that my stance is based on principle and not financial gain. If anyone's going to quote me on any part of why I support company director remuneration, they need to include that precursor, because otherwise it's completely out of context. But I think it should be the individual's call. If Dion wants to donate it to mental health, let him. If someone wants to send their kid to school or pay for education or medical bills or reduce a mortgage, I think that that's their call to make. I ask that you do keep an open mind to this, listen to what I'm saying, and please be open to changing your mind if you think what I'm saying is valid. My first point around this is that you get what you pay for. Our policy as a city is that our company directors' fees are 80% that of the private sector, and this is to reflect the element of public service, but to still attract quality candidates. You know, what would it look like if you wanted to hire staff with a specialised skill set and experience, and with it carried additional liability, but the pay was zero? A good and diverse council doesn't need to have everyone with company director business acumen, but you do need some, especially if we think that having a CCO board link with the council is of value, which we do. The fact is, fair remuneration is a factor in attracting quality candidates. If there aren't any quality ones available, appoint an independent, whom you most certainly need to pay. But if one of them is a capable councillor director, it makes it far easier for the public to get rid of them from both the council and from that board if they're not performing. The public can't do that for independent directors. My second point around this is liability. Dave's touched on the tax liability, but honestly it does look like a nightmare. Some people being paid for the same job, who pays the tax on the income? In the instance that it appears that you're now loading up with a tax liability, is the council liable for that, or the company that's paying it to council? Dave's questions also now raises, can you claim on expenses related to that work, or if not? And the relationship between a company and the director is a private one, so technically that current practice should have the current practice should have the fees paid to the individual, with a letter stating that the council wants you on the board and that they want the fees, but they'll indemnify you for your tax liability. And if you donate it to a charity, then it's the net after-tax amount. But anyway, leaving tax, I think that just illustrates how complicated that is, because it's hard to get some consistencies there. You know, the law is different for company directors than it is for councillors. It's hard to sue someone for doing an incompetent job when they do it for free. You know, try complaining about a bag of coffee when it was given to you free of charge. The inconsistency here is that all the real-world liabilities of a company director still applies. If you're on a board of a company, you can be prosecuted under the Securities Act, the Commerce Act, or the stringent new Health and Safety Act. It's almost certain that there will be company directors that will be prosecuted or go to prison over the coming years because someone died due to a poor company board decision. And that's irrelevant to whether they might be a city councillor or not. But there will not be a city councillor prosecuted or go to prison because someone died due to their council's poor decision, because the Act safeguards against it. It completely absolves them of this when a councillor acts in their councillor capacity, but not if they're a company director. So what I'm saying is that the law makes this distinction, the outside world remunerates due to this distinction, and I feel it's both commercially and morally wrong for us to not respect that. The liabilities are extensive, and why professional indemnity insurance, if you think that professional indemnity insurance will stop you being personally prosecuted as a director, that is a complete fallacy. That's part of the reason why company directors are remunerated. And my third and final point is, if you want a board to perform, you need to have a board of parity and peers. Imagine going to your work, doing the job, and a good job at that, that's required of you, taking on additional legal liability, and then for the other people that are doing the exact same job as you, sitting next to you, to be remunerated, but you're not. It breeds a clear A and a B team. What about someone on that non-remunerated B team that's slammed with a pile of work that they need to do into the wee small hours? Do you think that they'll put in every ounce of effort, like they should, when they know that they're literally not valued for it, like the others are? Do you think they'll put up their hand to take on or engage over and above additional due diligence? I would, and I hope that others would too, but I think there's a far higher chance that not everyone will. If a councillor doesn't do their due diligence and gets it wrong, they don't run the risk of prosecution or jail time, but a company director does. There's no out clause like there is for councillors. The only argument that I can accept around directors' fees not being payable to the person doing the work is the parallel of when a staff member is appointed to a board and it goes to the company. But I think the difference here is twofold. One, city councillors are legally not staff members, as David has said. That's why you pay additional taxes like ACC and can't receive KiwiSaver contributions, just like a director. When a staff member isn't remunerated, it's because it's the position that's appointed. The base salary of the job reflects that, but in this role it does not. No councillor is appointed to boards as of right. It's not a job that goes with the role. The Fendalton councillor isn't on CTHL. They need to apply for it, submit a CV, go through an interview process with an independent recruitment company, and if they're capable, they're selected on merit and capability. You know, I can accept that the last term's directors weren't remunerated because a proper interview process didn't occur. However, in this term it has been followed properly, and it's in keeping with the proper process. So I think remuneration here would be consistent. Just finally, I think that it's a councillor's choice, that if they want to put their name forward for an additional role like this or not, it is completely up to them. But equally, it should be the individual's call if, like me, they want to donate that remuneration to charity or not. If it's going to medical bills, a mortgage, education, I think that's their call to make, and it's no one else's business. I think the law makes it very clear, the distinction between the roles, and I just think that it's imperative that we as a council do too.
Thank you. Sarah, then Glenn.
Thank you. I'd like to address a couple of points that both Councillor East and Goff have made. And I'd like to start by disagreeing with Councillor East in that 12 months ago, when we were going through the election campaign, I did not see myself as applying for a job. I saw myself putting my hand up for public service, and I think that's quite a different thing. The change in the directorship fees and where they might go was well foreshadowed, both in the previous term and prior to the election, and I think that anyone standing in the previous election would not have been expecting to have remuneration for their directorships. Councillor Goff mentions that it is people's choice completely as to whether they apply for these directorships or not, and that is completely true. And they do that hopefully after this resolution, knowing that they won't be remunerated for it and that that money will go to a good cause. I disagree with the potential to choose where you put your money. I think that that runs the risk over time of people picking and choosing charities or organisations within their own ward and being perceived to be buying votes in some cases, and I think that is a really dangerous path for us to go down. I think that funds such as the Mayor's Welfare Fund, in the last term the Imagination Station, which was a metropolitan organisation, and now the Sustainable Development Fund, I think are really, really good ones to be looking at for a citywide project rather than a perception of potentially buying votes in our wards. We are remunerated, and I think that Councillor Goff was incorrect when he said that people would be taking on extra workload without remuneration, because actually we are well paid. And I know that some people were took a pay cut, but this is the most I've ever earned, and I feel like I am very well paid to do this job, and I don't think that the extra responsibilities that I've taken on in various areas should be paid any more than that. And I've taken on ones for various organisations that aren't directorships and probably spend just as many hours doing them, and I don't see that would mean that I should be paid any more. It's part of my job as a councillor to do those. Having staff on boards is very similar. It's part of the job, and they, like us, are paid by the ratepayers to do our jobs. And so that's why I'll be supporting this today, so that we can enhance these funds for metropolitan benefit and just get on with doing our public service jobs.
Thank you. Glenn, then Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Just 3 quick points. Just the first, I think, in point 4, recognising the element of public service is the starting point for me. That underpins what we do, that our work is in fact not a job but a vocation, and that out of that, if we are appointed as a director, we are only appointed by virtue of being a city councillor in the first place. Secondly, just something to consider is the dynamic that was prevalent in a previous council of which I was a part, where certain councillors received additional remuneration with the directorships, and it really served to split the council. And that was, it's not much fun looking in the annual report, the public annual report, to see which councillors are receiving additional remuneration on top of those that aren't. You know, it's fair to say there was a strong correlation between that and certain voting patterns and appointments. This council is similar to the previous council came in determined that it would be united and that it would work together for the city, and we have to remain united. It's that egalitarianism that Phil was talking about, which I'm appealing to today. And thirdly, I'm happy for the trans waste fees to go to the Mayor's Welfare Fund. There's some people in real dire straits in this city. The 2 standout features, as Vicky will tell you, of that fund are for heating and for rent arrears. So if you imagine people struggling to keep warm in the winter, and whereas for us, we may not think about that, or if you imagine people struggling to pay the rent, and we don't think about that, and for many of those people it comes down between a trade-off between food, rent arrears and heating, and often they have to choose 2 out of 3. In some cases, 1 out of 3. So you can't live like that. I mean, I know there's a range of views on this, but to me, $101,000 is actually a pretty good, you know, remuneration for what we do. I don't need any more, but I know a lot of people in the city who do. So I please urge you to support these recommendations today.
Okay, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you. I totally support this proposal. With respect to the comments from Councillor East, there are no surprises in my view that this matter's before us today, that it's come before this council, and I'm also not anticipating any surprise when the matter is carried, as I expect it will be. His comments might have held some water in the last term of council. However, in this term, given the history of the matter, I don't think there's any surprise that we're having this discussion today, and I don't think there'll be any surprise at what I expect to be the outcome. No councillor is forced to go on any board. They simply don't have to do so. There's no element of arm twisting here. I don't have an issue with the level of skill or confidence that any current councillors that have been appointed to boards have. And I don't think that an expectation that there would be no remuneration paid for those roles has resulted in a lower level of skill or competence or ability in the appointments that we've made. I'm comfortable that that can and will continue to be the case as a result of this resolution today. In terms of the distribution of the directors' fees to charitable causes, I think the breadth of needs, individuals and organisations that can be funded through the 2 funds that are proposed is sufficient to make this work. In terms of the directorships and trusteeships that I hold, I feel valued exactly the same as the next person at the table, and in terms of the effort that I put in, I know that I put in exactly the same amount of work in preparation for meetings and contribution at meetings as I would if I was paid. It makes absolutely no difference to me at all. There are plenty of other things that I could go off and do if I wasn't comfortable with the level of salary that this role paid me, and I imagine that I'm not on my own when I say that the money wasn't my motivation for running for election. That may well be the case for everyone around the table. As regards gifting to a charity of choice, and I've got some sympathy for Dion's comments earlier, I could easily set up the Andrew Turner Banks Peninsula Charitable Trust as a charitable organisation, I could appoint some of my close friends as trustees in accordance with a trust deed that we all agreed with. And I could request that my fees be donated to that organisation and then distributed according to a distribution regime of which myself and my friends had been the architect. That might have implications for the way in which people in my ward might view my overt generosity, might even translate into votes at an election. I know it's an extreme example, but I think it demonstrates why we need a reasonably tight distribution regime as we've got in the report today. So I'm going to vote for this. We all earn a reasonable salary. We all know the breadth and the nature of the role, and we all knew that before we decided to stand for election, or at least I hope we did. There are a limited number of hours in the week that are naturally limited by time. Different councillors spend those hours in different ways, but there's a limited number of hours that we can work. I don't think that that means that different councillors should be remunerated in different ways for that limited amount of time that we all have and we're all very, very aware of. So I'm totally supportive of this. And having heard the debate, and I've got respect for the different issues that have been raised, that's certainly my position. I'll be supporting this wholeheartedly, and I implore others to do the same.
Thank you. Look, I'll just wrap it up. First of all, I've sort of, one, I want to thank everyone for the respect with which we've debated the issues. Everyone's entitled to have a view, and we don't all have the same view around the table, but I think people have been very respectful, and I thank you all for that. I'm going to take a little bit of responsibility in this regard, because I do want to apologise to councillors for not having this paper ready for the previous council to consider. But now that it's here on the table, we have got an opportunity to establish a framework for our future councils. So if a future council wants to revisit this issue, then they can do so, but this is where we start. We start each term with the decision that we make today. And I think that for me, I mean, I won't actually run through the numbers, but councillors are paid almost twice what ECAN members are paid. They're paid nearly 3 times, or almost 3 times what Selwyn councillors are paid, and well, more than twice what Waimakariri councillors are paid. So I think when we're doing comparisons between, you know, who you sit next to in decision-making environments, I just think that, you know, we're in a reasonably different position here in Christchurch as a large city, because the Remuneration Authority makes a decision based on the size of the council, not the amount of work that people do. There's an assumption that there's a correlation, but actually every council around this table will know that there isn't a direct correlation, because there are issues that come up in your wards that suddenly just, you know, take your work rate up 1,000-fold, and then at other times things sort of quieten down and it's somebody else's turn to sort of be involved in serious issues, and there are some councillors that just seem to be busy all the time. And look, I am going to just acknowledge what Glenn said too. Paid directorships can be divisive. They can be. They don't have to be, but they can be, and it's the fact that they can be that has driven my view that we should have done this some time ago. And there are complex issues, and we have taken advice, so that's why it has taken so long. My final point around choosing charities. People have made the comment about us being self-employed. We're self-employed because you can't pinpoint an employer, but actually we're all really employed on behalf of the people of Christchurch. And when I was a member of Parliament, we were not treated as self-employed for tax purposes. So although we were self-employed, there's a statement in the legislation that covers members of Parliament that says that for tax purposes you will be treated as an employee. And the decision to not treat councillors and community board members and mayors and chairs and members as employees, that decision was made by local government New Zealand many years ago after consultation with councils around this country. So if anyone wants to revisit the question of whether we're employees or whether we're self-employed, it took me a while to work out I was self-employed because I was just so used to the environment of being treated as an employee, then it has to go through a process and would require a change of the law. But that doesn't make us any less accountable to the people of Christchurch. In terms of choosing charities, obviously there's some sympathy with that, but under this proposal it's not the councillors' money, and that's the reason that I don't support changing that. But each year when we choose the financial year, this now requires us to come back and revisit it. So it may well be that there will be a different fund that will be chosen in the future, but the option's there. So, you know, I'd like to leave it like this for the 2017-18 year. I think to get the Innovation and Sustainability Fund off to a flying start with the level of support that the Mayor's Welfare Fund has enjoyed up until now, I think really does enable both of those things to be achieved. So again, thank you very much for the quality of the debate, and on that note I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. So that's David and Jamie. Can you record my motion against 7? And Dion vote against 7. Item 7, yeah.
So Joe, just if you can record, yeah, Dave and I on the minutes as against, please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it will be.
Thank you.
That's good. So that's carried. Thank you very much. And look, I think we might